Growing up in Miami subjected me to a lot of realizations about climate injustice and how that permeates all of our lives. Growing up and living through hurricanes, it was very clear to me that some people suffered more than others. People who looked more like me, had more like me, were set to suffer the worst from a crisis that they didn't create. And that made me angry and sad and left me in a lot of despair. And I didn't know what to do with a lot of those feelings. And I started organizing around climate when I was about 16 years old, and through organizing I found my way to Sunrise, which was this place where I first encountered what it meant to feel joy and principled struggle in a movement rather than fear and despair. And that's what brought me to both the movement and I think what carried me to be on this team now.
I feel like it was a lot of things. It was a weird time. I was in a in-between period of I always had a thing that was my thing, and I just didn't at that moment. And at the same time, I was in 7th or 8th grade, one of them. And I pretty much hated school. I was like, this is awful. My only teacher who cared about teaching anything was my science teacher, who was teaching me about climate change stuff. And she was like, there's this thing happening, you could go to a meeting. And I was like, sure. And it was actually not a meeting, it was a retreat that the hub in my area was holding. It was like a day-long retreat, 2-day-long retreat, yeah. And I went, and I was immediately enthralled in this magic of what Sunrise felt like, and having a community that wasn't just white people, and was yeah, it was very different than anything I'd ever experienced.
Yeah, well, I started organizing around anti-gun violence stuff right after the Parkland shooting. I was in my sophomore year in high school, and yeah, it was just, there was a fair amount of gun violence in my community that year, and we lost 2 students to gun violence a few months before, and my house had been shot at a few months before that, and it was just really live, and we were yeah, we're fighting, it was really the fight for young people. We're fighting for our lives here. And then, and I remember doing a lot of this work and talking about how places that were hit harder by the climate crisis often had higher rates of gun violence, just because there was more poverty, and there was more people were just fighting harder to survive, and there was less resources. And I was I knew there was that connection, but I still wasn't really into climate. And then yeah, I think we passed a big bill in Massachusetts, and a lot of the work just kind of ramped down, and some of the people I was organizing with went to college. It just kind of ended with the people who I was organizing with. And then when I found Sunrise, yeah, it was just it felt just another branch off of the same tree. And I was yeah, this is another path in this huge fight that we're all fighting for. And I felt really excited, because it felt like organizing with Sunrise was fighting for my future, and fighting for young people, and fighting for the world I want to see. And in the world I wanted to see was one without gun violence. And I was oh, in a way this is continuing the fight that I started the year before, just under a different lens.
So Reading is about half immigrant, and was doing immigration organizing, and so much, yeah, especially in 2017 after Trump, so much felt kind of like a hydra. You would chop one head off and 2 more would grow back, and there just wasn't an answer to how we get to the heart, kind of. And yeah, I was in 2018 doing campus organizing, and some of my friends were involved in Sunrise, and they invited me to this DC for some unspecified action. It was the Pelosi sit-in, and then I was oh, cool. They got me into a training. We went through the whole theory of change and political alignments and how we changed to common sense. And I was oh shit. Or sorry, I don't know if I can swear, but okay. Great. I was yeah, oh, this is how we get to the heart. Yeah, what felt exhausting was just there's no answer to how we change the common sense. And then I was cool, starting a hub. And I started a hub.
I've been at Sunrise for a minute, but I don't think I joined after the Nancy Pelosi sit-in. So November 2018, I saw it on Twitter. I was just scrolling around. I think I was a sophomore in high school, and 2 weeks later, I got on a bus with 75 random high schoolers from Kentucky, and I came to the second Nancy Pelosi sit-in. And then from then on out, I was pretty hooked, and I did hub work, and I got involved locally and regionally, and then started to do middle and high school work, and somehow ended up here on Frontline.
So I got started in Sunrise. I was involved in my school's fossil fuel divestment campaign way back in like 2016, 2017. I was my freshman in college. And it was like my first discovery with organizing. I really, really loved it. I remember like feeling like, oh, this isn't enough. Like it feels like this only changes things on my campus. And somebody told me, Stevie actually was a senior in my school, and they knew people who were like founding Sunrise at the time. And so they were like, oh, you should come to this launch training that's happening in June. It's called Sunrise, like, oh, the whole thing. And yeah, I'd like sort of heard about it, but I went to the launch training and I was so excited by everything in it. I remember particularly there was this big yellow slide in our trainings where like you talk about like fossil fuel billionaires and everything, and there's a big yellow slide that says like, therefore ... we got to take over. And I literally remember sitting and seeing that slide and being like, okay, they get it. Like they like get how big this is and what we need to do. So I went back to Minneapolis. I started a hub there where we were actually canvassing back then on line 3 and stopping line 3 way back in 2017. And then when I went back to college, I also converted my divestment campaign into a Sunrise hub. So really was just doing everything I could. And then kept volunteering. Every time someone asked me to do something, I said yes, like all the time. And eventually in my sophomore year, so like 6 months after I joined Sunrise, Sarah Blaze asked me to help run our first ever training for trainers, and then to be our like training coordinator, which we didn't really have directors then, so be our training coordinator. And I said yes, and I was like so honored. And yeah, I like ran our trainings program as a full-time student all of that spring and that summer. And that summer, I spent my summer in India working on like air pollution in Delhi, and I think like that was the time where I was like, oh, this stuff around the climate crisis, like it's not just me spending time, like it feels so in my backyard that I made the decision. I was like, yeah, it's like not enough to just do this as like a student part-time. And when the Pelosi sit-in happened in 2018, I made the decision to stop going to school and work for Sunrise full-time. And then since then I was like the trainings director, and then eventually started running the front-loading team.
I always call it the Sunrise magic. Like it's a feeling in your body that's just like warm and like happy and comfortable to be around other people who also care about the same thing. It's just like, it's really unique. I don't even know how to like put a finger on it. Yeah.
I think I got into Sunrise work not because of climate change. I like joke that this year is the year that I've thought the most about climate change ever. I got into Sunrise work because I didn't see a movement that cared about a just transition outside of Appalachia. And I think it felt really, I think empowering is too shallow of a word, but it mattered that there was somebody talking about the place that I called home on a national stage and was ready and willing to fight like hell for the solutions that it needed, even if they were so outside of what was being proposed at the time. And so I don't know that that's the most rewarding thing I've done in Sunrise, but I think that was certainly why I first joined Sunrise. And then I think even just being a high schooler in Sunrise who was able to exist with power in this world, because I think that was not a feeling that I had just growing up and going to public school and existing in that sense. And I think, yeah, feeling that sense of deep personal and community agency has been huge.